The loading dock at Porter North Logistics smelled like diesel and cold concrete, and that was exactly where Callum Reed had wanted to be. Not in his corner office on the 14th floor, not in the boardroom where his VP of Operations had just spent 40 minutes presenting a slide deck that said everything except the truth. Here, under the flat gray sky of a Tuesday morning in Sudbury, wearing a borrowed he vest 2 sizes too large and a name badge that said Cal, he wanted to see what the numbers couldn't show him. He had made the decision 2 weeks earlier, sitting alone after midnight with a printed complaint form on his desk. Not a formal grievance. Something worse. A handwritten note, left unsigned, tucked inside an internal mail envelope addressed to no one. You built this company for people like us, but somewhere along the way you forgot we exist. Callum Reed, 41, founder and CEO of Porter North Logistics, one of the fastest-growing freight and courier companies in Ontario, had read those 11 words more times than he could count. He didn't sleep well after that. He kept thinking about his father, about the way Gordon Reed had come home from his warehouse shift every night, smelling like that same diesel, that same cold, and still managed to help Callum with his homework at the kitchen table in Timmins without once complaining. His father had worked for a company that never knew his name. Callum had sworn he would build something different. Now he wasn't sure he had, so he'd called his assistant, cleared 3 weeks from his calendar, and arranged with a regional HR coordinator he trusted completely to place him as a temporary logistics associate at the Sudbury Depot, one of Porter North's mid-sized hubs, far enough from Toronto that nobody would recognize him. He told no one else. He signed in as Cal McPherson, contract worker. He started on a Monday. By the end of his first week, he understood the complaint. The depot floor ran on pressure. Shift supervisors moved fast, spoke faster, and measured everything in package throughput and scan rates. There were no bad people here exactly, just a culture that had quietly calcified into something efficient and cold. He heard the way dispatch spoke to drivers when a route ran late. He watched a veteran sorter named Harold get docked 15 minutes of pay because he'd stopped to help a colleague whose hand scanner had jammed. He noticed that the break room had a coffee machine that hadn't worked in 4 months, a microwave with a taped-over door, and one plastic chair with a broken leg propped against the wall because nobody had bothered to replace it. He also noticed her. Her name tag read Meg. She worked the inbound receiving station, signing off manifests and cross-checking freight labels against digital logs, with a focus that made her look like she was diffusing something. She was with maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back under a Porter North cap, and the kind of posture that came from years of carrying weight without being asked. She didn't chat much. She didn't drift. She moved with purpose and kept her head down, and Callum had noticed early on that she was the one people came to when the system threw an error or a manifest didn't reconcile. Not the shift supervisor. Her. She was precise, competent, and she never smiled with her whole face. He noticed that too. On his 8th day, a Wednesday, he was restocking the manifest binders in the back office when he heard the shift supervisor, a man named Terry, who was not unkind but was relentlessly literal, speaking to someone around the corner in a tone that made Callum set down the binders and stay still. I've told you twice, Meg, the bereavement policy is 3 days. You've used 3 days. That's the policy. A pause. I know. Her voice was quiet, measured, like someone who had learned to keep the lid on tight in public. If you need more time, you'll need to go unpaid. I can't make exceptions. I understand, she said, and that was it. No argument, no tears, just the sound of her walking back to her station and the supervisor moving in the other direction, and Callum standing very still in the back office with his hands flat on the shelf. 3 days. Her mother had died. He didn't know that yet, but he would. And 3 days was what the policy gave her. He thought about his father again. About what 3 days would have meant to his mother when Gordon Reed passed. That afternoon, he watched Meg from a careful distance. She made no errors. She cleared a backlog of 47 exception packages that had been sitting in the queue for 2 days. She helped a new hire named Brendan figure out the manifest reconciliation software without making him feel stupid about not knowing. When a client called the depot floor line with a lost freight inquiry, she tracked the shipment in 4 minutes and called the client back personally. Then her shift ended, and she walked to the back hallway, pushed through the door to the break room, and didn't come out for a long time. Callum gave it 5 minutes. Then he went in. She was sitting on the old plastic chair, the one with the broken leg, with her back against the wall and her eyes closed. She wasn't crying. She looked like someone past the crying part, in the place that comes after, where the exhaustion just sits on you like weather. A paper cup of vending machine coffee was balanced on her knee, untouched. He didn't say anything at first. He got himself a cup of water from the tap, stood for a moment, and then sat on the edge of the table across from her because there was nowhere else to sit. "Long one," he said. Not a question. She opened her eyes and looked at him with the expression of someone deciding how much to bother. "They're all long ones," she said, finally. He waited. She looked down at the coffee. "Terry told you, I'm guessing." "No," Callum said. "I just heard the tail end of it. I wasn't trying to. It's fine." She said it the way people say it's fine when they mean something much larger than fine, something they have given up expecting anyone to understand. Policy's policy. That doesn't mean it's right. She looked at him again, sharper this time. "You've been here, what, 10 days? And you're already taking on Terry." "I'm not taking on Terry. I'm just saying a policy can be technically correct and still be wrong." She was quiet for a moment. "My mom passed 12 days ago," she said. "Pancreatic cancer. 8 weeks from diagnosis to. It was fast. My brother is 8. He's been staying with my aunt in North Bay, but she can only keep him until the end of the month, and then I have to figure out." She trailed off, looking at nothing in particular. "Sorry, you didn't ask for all that. You don't have to apologize." "I know." But she said it like she'd been apologizing her whole life and hadn't found a way to stop yet. Callum looked at her. She wasn't performing any of this. There was no bid for sympathy in her voice, no angle. She was just a woman in a broken-leg chair in a depressing break room talking to a coworker she barely knew because the pressure gauge had finally tipped, and something had to come out somewhere. Callum asked, "Your brother?" She looked at him, surprised by the question. "Ellie, what does he like?" A pause. Then, very softly, something changed in her face. Not a smile, exactly, but the memory of one. "He likes trains, really likes them. He can tell you the difference between a CN consist and a CP consist just by the horn." Callum felt something tighten in his chest. "Smart kid, he's the best kid," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, and she looked away quickly and pressed her lips together. They sat in silence for a moment. The vending machine hummed. Somewhere on the floor, a pallet jack beeped. "I have to be okay," she said, more to herself than to him. "He's going to come back here and he's going to look at me to see if it's okay to fall apart. And I can't be the one who..." Stead-eyed herself. "So I have to be okay." Callum didn't say anything. There was nothing adequate to say. He just sat with her in the quiet until her break was over. And then she stood, smoothed her vest, put the cup in the bin, and walked back out to the floor like nothing had happened. And Callum sat alone in the break room for another 3 minutes, looking at the broken coffee machine and the taped-over microwave and the one bad chair, and thought, "I built this. All of it. Including this." Her full name, he found out later, was Megan Holt. She'd been with Porter North for 4 years, starting as a casual sorter and working her way up to inbound receiving lead without ever being given the title or the pay that went with it. Her performance reviews were consistently excellent. Her absenteeism rate, prior to the last 2 weeks, was the lowest in the depot. She had flagged 3 significant billing errors in the past year that saved the company money she had never been thanked for. Callum found all of this in the personnel system that evening, back in his rental apartment, laptop open at the kitchen table. He sat with it for a long time. He also found something else, a scanned document in her file from 3 years ago. A commendation note, submitted by a client named Darlene Arsenault from a medical supply company in Sault Ste. Marie. The note read, in part, that a Porter North employee named Megan had gone significantly out of her way during a critical delivery, and that her professionalism and care had made a genuine difference at a difficult time for their organization. Callum read it twice. Then he pulled up the client account. The delivery in question had been a rush shipment of medical equipment, a CPAP machine and associated supplies, rerouted on short notice to a residential address rather than the original clinic destination. The note didn't explain why, but Callum had been in this business long enough to understand what that kind of reroute usually meant. Someone had needed that equipment at home, and Megan had made sure it got there. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. He had started Porter North at 31, in a rented bay in Barrie, with 2 leased vans, and his father's work ethic folded into his back pocket like a note he kept reaching for. He had built it for people like his father, people who showed up and did the work and deserved to be treated like the business, couldn't run without them because it couldn't. That had been the whole point. Somewhere in the scaling, the acquisitions, the expansion into BC, the new investor board, the restructuring, the point had gotten buried under process documents and throughput metrics. He had let it happen. He had been so focused on making the company work that he had stopped checking whether it still meant something. A handwritten complaint. A woman eating a cold coffee alone in a break room. A policy that gave 3 days to grieve. He closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a while. The next morning he was back on the floor at 6:15 stacking inbound freight beside the receiving station. Megan arrived at 6:30, hung her bag on her hook, pulled up her manifest queue, and got to work. She nodded at him. He nodded back. Around 9, during a lull while a delayed truck was being sorted, he was close enough to overhear her on a call. She had her back to the floor, voice low. He wasn't trying to listen, but the depot was quiet and sound carried. "I know, Aunt Carol, I know. I just need 2 more weeks, and then I'll have the room set up for him, I promise. He can start school here in September. I've already called the principal." A pause. "He's going to be okay. We're both going to be okay." She hung up and stood with her hand flat on the shelf for a moment, not moving. Then she turned around, saw Callum, and her expression reset immediately into something neutral and professional. He looked away, giving her the privacy of pretending he hadn't heard. But he had, and it stayed with him all day. The way she had said we're both going to be okay with a certainty she was still building, day by day, line by line, out of whatever she had left. He thought about his father's hands. He thought about the note on his desk. He thought about the broken coffee machine and 3 days of bereavement pay, and a title she'd earned that no one had given her. That evening he made some calls. He was careful. He didn't want Megan to know where it was coming from. Not yet. Not because he was hiding from accountability, but because he understood something from watching her. She was a person who kept score of what she owed people, and he didn't want to put her in debt to anyone. He wanted this to feel like the world quietly righting itself, which in a way it was. Through the Porter North Employee Assistance Fund, a program that existed on paper but had never been properly resourced, he arranged for an immediate extension of paid bereavement leave, retroactive, under a new emergency provision he authorized quietly through the HR director in Toronto. He made it available to any employee at any depot who had lost an immediate family member in the past 90 days, framing it as a policy review that had been underway. 3 people at the Sudbury depot qualified. Megan was one of them. He also contacted someone at head office about the receiving lead position. The conversation was short and direct. "Who's doing the job at Sudbury inbound?" "Technically, it's unfilled. Megan Holt has been covering it for how long?" A pause. "About 14 months. Fix it," Callum said, and he put the phone down. The next piece took longer. He'd been thinking about Eli, the 8-year-old who liked trains, who was waiting in North Bay, not in quite what was coming, whose sister was holding the whole thing together with both hands and sheer will. Callum called a contact at a CN education outreach program he'd partnered with 2 years ago for a corporate charity event. He explained, without specifics, that he was aware of a child who had recently lost a parent and was passionate about trains, and asked what was possible. The contact called back the next day with an offer: a private depot tour in Sudbury, CN swag package, a signed photo from one of the engineers. Small things. But Callum had learned, watching his father open a handwritten thank you card from a client once and keep it in his wallet for 6 years, that small things were rarely small. He arranged for the package to arrive at the depot addressed to Megan with a note that read only, "For Eli. From a friend of your mother's industry." He didn't know if that framing would land, but he hoped it would feel like the world keeping faith with her mother somehow, passing something forward. The morning it arrived, he was at the back of the floor reorganizing freight manifests he didn't need to reorganize, watching from a careful angle as the depot admin handed Megan the package. She opened it slowly, head down, reading the note first. Her hands went still. She read it again. Then she opened the box and saw the CN materials inside, and her whole body went quiet in a way that was different from her usual stillness. Not the stillness of holding herself together, but the stillness of someone who has just been, without warning, completely undone. She sat down on the edge of the receiving desk and pressed the note to her chest. She didn't cry loudly. She barely made a sound, but her shoulders shook for a moment, and she turned her face away from the floor, and Callum looked down at his clipboard and did not move, because some moments you don't interrupt. When she was ready, she folded the note carefully, put it in her jacket pocket, closed the box, and stood up. Her eyes were red. She caught Callum looking in her general direction and said quietly, "Sorry, you don't have to apologize," he said, the same thing he'd said in the break room. She looked at him for a long moment. "You keep saying that. I'll keep meaning it." Something shifted in her expression, not suspicion, more like recalibration. "You're not from here," she said. "Are you? Not really." It wasn't quite an accusation, but it was a question she was letting hang in the air, and Callum felt the weight of it. "No," he said, "not exactly." She nodded slowly, like she was filing that away. Then she went back to work. He had 2 days left in his undercover placement. He spent them the way he'd spent the rest, on the floor, listening, watching, stacking freight that didn't need stacking. But he was also thinking about what came next. Because the individual pieces, Megan's leave, her title, the package for Eli, those were gestures. Real ones, he hoped, but gestures. The system that had produced 3 days' bereavement and 14 months of unpaid leadership and a broken coffee machine no one fixed. That was the thing that needed surgery, not bandages. On his last evening, he stayed late, sitting in the empty break room after everyone else had gone. He had a legal pad and a pen, and he wrote for 2 hours. Not a memo, not a deck. Just a list in his own handwriting of every specific thing he had seen in 3 weeks at this depot that his company had the power to fix and hadn't. The list was 2 pages long. At the top he wrote, "What I forgot." He folded it and put it in his jacket pocket next to his real phone, the one that had been off for 3 weeks. The following Monday, Callum Reed walked into the Sudbury depot in a different jacket. No high-vis vest. No name badge that said Cal. He came in through the front, not the loading dock, and he asked the front desk to please let the depot manager know he was here and would like to address the full team at the end of the morning shift. He had called ahead through HR. Everyone at the depot had been told only that a senior representative from head office would be visiting. He had not given his name. At 11:30, the morning crew gathered in the staging area. Pallets had been pushed aside to make space. People came in ones and twos in their high-vis vests, coffee cups in hand, looking mildly curious and mild the way people always look when corporate shows up unannounced. Callum stood in front of them. He didn't have a slide deck. "Most of you know me as Cal," he said, "the contract worker who couldn't wrap a pallet straight." A few people laughed. A few people looked confused. He watched understanding move across the room in waves. Megan, standing near the back, had gone very still. "My name is Callum Reed. I founded Porter North Logistics 11 years ago. I came here because someone left a note on my desk that I couldn't ignore, and I needed to find out whether what it said was true." He paused. It was. The room was quiet. "I've been watching this team for 3 weeks. I've seen how you handle pressure and errors and short staffing and a coffee machine that's been broken for 4 months. He heard a couple of surprised laughs at that. "I've seen the way you cover for each other when the system fails, and the way you absorb the weight of policies that were written for efficiency rather than for people. That's on me. This company started with a different promise, and somewhere I let that promise get buried." He looked around the room. He found Megan's face. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't fully read. Something between recognition and something older, something careful. "I'm here to tell you what's changing," he said, "and to tell you why." He went through the list. Extended bereavement leave, effective immediately across all depots. A reclassification process for employees performing above-grade work without the corresponding title or pay. He did not name Megan, but he looked at her when he said it, and she looked back. A new depot maintenance protocol because people work better when the place they work in isn't falling apart. An employee advocacy process with a direct line to a senior HR ombudsperson, not their immediate supervisor. And then he said the thing he had rehearsed and nearly cut a dozen times because it felt too personal for a company announcement, but kept. "There's someone on this team who reminded me, without knowing she was doing it, of the reason I started this company. She showed up every day for 4 years, did more than her job asked, and never once made anyone feel small for not knowing something she knew. That's not compliance. That's character. And this company should be built around people like her, not the other way around." He didn't look at Megan when he said it. He looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked up. "I'm sorry it took me this long to come back to the floor. I won't make that mistake again." The applause started slowly. By the end it was full and warm and a little surprised, the way it sounds when people have been waiting a long time for something to be said. Afterward, as people drifted back to the floor, he made his way through the group. He stopped when he reached Megan. She was standing slightly apart from the others, arms folded, the CN package tucked under one arm. She had brought it in that morning, he realized. The box with Eli's things. "You sent that," she said. Not a question. "Yes. And the leave extension." "Yes." She looked at him steadily. "Why didn't you just tell me who you were?" "Because I needed to see what I was actually looking at," he said. "Not what someone would show a CEO." She considered that. "And what were you looking at?" "Someone who's been holding up more than her share of the ceiling," he said, "for a very long time." Something in her face shifted. She didn't look away, but her jaw loosened, just slightly, and he understood that she had been braced for something, some form of management speak or polished corporate empathy, and had not gotten it. "The note," she said quietly. "The one that came with Eli's package, a friend of your mother's industry." She pressed her lips together. "How did you know to say it that way?" Callum was quiet for a moment. "Because I read your file," he said carefully, "and I understood that she was someone who worked hard her whole life and raised 2 kids and probably never got enough back from the world she put into it. I wanted him to feel like that world remembered her." Megan looked at him for a long time. Then she looked down at the box under her arm. "He's going to lose his mind over this," she said softly. "He's going to want to know every person involved in getting it to him. He sounds like someone who pays attention. He gets that from her." Her voice was steady, but the word "her" carried everything. They stood in that for a moment. The depot floor hummed around them. "Come back to Toronto sometime," Callum said. "I mean that professionally. I want to talk to you about what this depot needs from someone who actually knows it." "I already wrote that list," she said. "I wrote it 8 months ago. Nobody asked. I'm asking." She looked at him with something that was almost a smile, but not yet. "I'll think about it." He nodded. He started to turn away, then stopped. "How's Eli settling in? With the transition?" She exhaled, a long breath that carried the edges of the question. "He hasn't fully landed yet. He still talks about going back to the old house. He asks about her in this very careful way, like he's testing whether I'll fall apart if he does." She shook her head slightly. "I keep waiting for the right time to let us both." "There might not be a right time," Callum said. "There might just be a time." She looked at him. "Yeah," she said. "Maybe." He left her there, standing in the morning light from the depot's high windows, the box of train things under her arm and the note still folded in her jacket pocket. 3 weeks later, Callum was back in his corner office in Toronto when the email came in. It was short, professional, and had a 12-page document attached titled Sudbury Depot. Operational and Culture Assessment. M. Holt. He opened it. It was precise, thorough, and said several things that no one on his senior leadership team had managed to say in 4 years of quarterly reviews. He read it twice, then he picked up his phone and dialed. "Mrs. Holt," he said when she picked up. "I've read the document." A pause. "And? I want you in Toronto, permanently. Regional operations. You'd be the person this company actually needs in that role." Silence on the other end. Then, "Ellie starts school here in September. Porter North has a Toronto office. We also have a remote work policy that I apparently haven't been paying enough attention to." He paused. "We can make it work if you want it to work." Another silence. He heard faintly in the background the sound of a train horn, a long, low blast, the kind that carries across a Canadian morning like something that has always been there. "Okay," she said. "Let's talk." And in that office on the 14th floor, with the autumn light coming through the window and the city moving below, Callum Reid felt something that had been missing for longer than he'd admitted, a sense that the company he had built was, finally, becoming again what he had always meant it to be, not because of a restructuring plan or a new initiative, because of a woman in a broken-leg chair who had shown up anyway, and an 8-year-old who loved the sound of trains, and a note that said we're both going to be okay before either of them was sure it was true. He thought of his father and thought, "Yeah, you'd like her, Dad." Outside, the city carried on, unhurried and indifferent, the way cities do. But inside, something had been put right, quietly, without ceremony, the way the best things usually are.